Matthew, everyday audiophile, music lover, and beer enthusiast. Though again today, we're going to enjoy some coffee out of this 12-pound mug. Oh, that's quite nice. It's a little too early again to be having a beer, but that's not going to stop us from talking about today's topic, which, if you've seen a few of their ads online, Scott Walker Audio of Anaheim, California, and Keller, Texas, had a super speaker showcase this weekend. So it was 3 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and they had different speakers every day, basically a super system every single day to highlight. The first day, which I didn't make it to, was the Estelon Extreme Mark IIs. The second day, which I did make it to, was the Acora VRCs, and the last day was the Von Schweikert Ultra 9, I believe. Their flagship speaker that's 8 feet tall, it seems like. Even though I didn't make it to all 3 days, I do have some very good feedback to share, and it's kind of the culmination of a year-long experience with Scott Walker rooms. That ended in good, but didn't start out as well. So I'm going to take you through this little journey and talk about how a couple issues that I had eventually turned out into what was a wonderful experience this weekend. So I used to drive every single day from the West Fort Worth side to nearly Dallas for my day job. And on a daily basis, I would pass by Scott Walker Audio, but I never went into their store, and that was mainly because I just didn't have the time and didn't have the money. Both of those combined. So my first real experience with Scott Walker Audio was almost exactly a year ago when they hosted a similar kind of super speaker showcase that lasted 2 days. The first day was dedicated to the audio group that I was in, and that was about 40 people that made it there and toured the 3 rooms that they had at the time. And they had the same Estelon Extreme Mark IIs, they had Magico S5 2024s, and then in the third room they had little Acora speakers with their new Bedrock system. And I did talk about this experience. Of the 3 systems, my favorite was the Acora, just because I loved the sound signature of it. I thought it was the most fun system to listen to, even though it was not the most technically correct. The Estelons and the Magicos were by far the better technically correct system. I just found myself returning to the Acora system again and again for the couple hours that I was there. And what it really came down to, at the end of the day, it took me some time to think about this, was room acoustics. The Magicos, through their engineering, did the best job by far dealing with a room that had zero treatment. Maybe not zero treatment, but not enough treatment. The Estelons, their biggest issue that they had was that they were just far too big for that room that they were in. There were tube traps in the back, but besides that, there wasn't really any treatment. And it was my opinion as we were leaving that these speakers weren't at their height. They could sound better. They just needed a little bit of treatment to deal with some of the modes and some of the reflections. So, fast forward to Southwest Audio Fest 2025, and Scott Walker and his team are showing the Acora VRCs in one of the largest rooms that I've ever seen. And I got the same sense from this speaker that it was capable of so much more, but because the room was so large, it's basically impossible to treat properly. Now, large rooms, if they are of sufficient size, you don't have to do as much treatment, but you still have to deal with the echoing. So as long as you can get rid of that echo, it's usually a pretty easy thing to deal with. But I think it was nearly impossible in that room, so it again came to a speaker system that had all the right components, but because of the room acoustics, they weren't able to truly showcase what a wonderful speaker that was. And I was not alone in this opinion. I think there were a lot of people that felt like the room held the speakers back. They were a wonderful speaker. They're a gorgeous speaker. It was that brown, marbly granite. Oh, such a great looking speaker. But the room held it back. So again, fast forward to this last weekend, and Scott Walker is having their super speaker showcase. And in between Southwest Audio Fest and this showcase, they knocked down the wall between their two biggest rooms and made it into one super room, so to speak. And I have to say, they knocked it out of the ballpark. They added all the right treatment so that you had the correct balance of reflections and correct balance of absorption. So Scott Walker, Josh, y'all did a great job in that room, and it truly shows. And now I can talk about how the system sounded that I listened to. I'm going to pull out my phone because there's no way in hell I'm remembering every single component in this system as I talk about it. But let's start from the speakers and work our way back to the source. So obviously, the speakers were the Acora VRCs, the same model that was at Southwest Audio Fest, but a different speaker itself. These were a black granite, one of the more standard finishes, I guess you could say. Powering them was the Audio Research Ref 330 monoblocks. These are using the new KT 170 tubes. I think it's 6 per amp. So a very powerful amplifier, but definitely needed for the speaker. Behind that was the Audio Research Ref 10 preamp. Another great piece of equipment. On the digital side, the MSB Cascade DAC. I never thought I'd get to see one in person, and it is truly stunning, for sure. It is a work of art. It costs about as much as you would think it costs. Let's just say that. Behind that was the Tyco Olympus server. Again, another piece that I'd never seen in person. And yeah, it definitely looks the part compared to their Tyco Extreme Music server. Neither of them are in a realm that I could ever afford, but definitely gorgeous and definitely look the part when you have them in the system. On the analog side, instead of having vinyl, Josh and Scott chose to highlight the tape side. So they had the Sonorous ATR-10 Mark II tape deck, and powering everything, they had the Synergistic Research SRX Power Cell. I think that's their flagship conditioner, but I'm not 100% sure. And then throughout everything, obviously they had Synergistic Research cabling, plus I think some crystal clear cabling as well. So top tier components and cabling and component stands from top to bottom. When I talk to my friends about this, I say this is $1 million system, and it's 100% true. It's probably, if I had to guess, more in the $1.5 million range. So definitely one of the top tier reference systems as far as components are concerned. Okay, now that we have the components out of the way, we can talk about how the system sounded. And as you might expect of a $1 million system, it sounded sublime. But that being said, it still surpassed my expectations. And this really, I think, comes down to the size of the room. It is a correct size for the speakers that they used, and having an appropriate amount of treatment for the room. It was very easy to walk in. You didn't feel like you were sitting right next to the speaker, and when it played, it was a truly effortless experience. It was in stark contrast to Southwest Audio Fest, where I felt like the speaker was having to work too hard to pressurize the gargantuan room that they were in at the time. Not that they were incapable of it, but it wasn't the ideal size room for the speaker. This room I thought was pretty perfect. The speakers didn't seem too large or too small, and the bass was effortless. It wasn't boomy. It had the right amount of punch in your chest, and it dug down so deep. There were a few tracks that they played that had just a low rumbling of bass throughout the whole thing, and never once did I feel like the bass was overpowering or boomy or lacked that texture and detail that you want out of any system. Being a double bass player myself, I am hugely critical of the quality of the bass in a system. Not only does it need to be the proper output, but it needs to have that texture, because that's what I'm used to as a bass player. So the fact that the system had that in spades is a thumbs up from me automatically. I could forgive a lot of things just to get that awesome bass performance. But to top it all off, the sound staging was really quite good. I think the larger rooms and larger systems, sometimes you can struggle with that sound staging. Obviously you'll get the left to right, but depending on the room acoustics, the depth is sometimes not as detailed soundstage wise as you would want, right? You still get front to back, but maybe you don't get the layering that you want just due to the size of the room. And the system handled it really well. I'm not going to say it was perfect or the best that I'd heard, but for as much detail and texture as you were getting in the lows, mids, and highs, and it was non-fatiguing, I think the sound staging was still really, really nice to listen to, especially when they turned on the tape deck. The MSB deck, as wonderful as it is, I hate to say it, is still topped by tape in general. It does get really close. It is the most analog sounding DAC that I've ever heard. It better be at $135,000. But it was wonderful to listen to. But when you compare it to tape, the tape took that texture to the extreme. It took that sound staging to the extreme. So any issues that I may have had on the digital side with that front to back, and again, I don't point this directly at the MSB, it's more of a combination of the room and the speakers. Any issues that I had with that, they went away as soon as tape was played, because tape inherently already has far more layering front to back. So it was able to fill in those gaps that I was hearing, and it just provided for a truly pleasurable listening experience. You could listen for hours and hours on end to that tape deck and be as happy as could be. One last thing that I want to mention, and this isn't a review of the system, I was humbled a little bit. It was truly nice. I do these videos because I just want to talk about my experiences. I feel like by nature of the hobby, we audiophiles tend to just be soloists and not really share our experiences with others around us or even want to share those. Obviously, we want to talk to people that are also into music, but it's not like everyone has a system. And so that's why I make these videos, is because I just want to talk about what I'm thinking, what I'm hearing, and just my audio journey as I make it through it. And if I'm able to share some useful information to anyone that's watching, then my job is done and it's a good week for me. So it was incredibly humbling. There was a couple that flew in from out of state for this showcase, and they recognized me from my videos. And that was super awesome to hear. And it just means that I'm doing the right thing. I'm going to continue doing it. Again, this doesn't bring in any income for me. I have a real job that I do on the side. I just love listening to music and sharing that with other people in the group and anyone else that's watching these videos. But back to the showcase. Scott, Josh, Andy, all of you did such an awesome job setting up this showcase, and I really do appreciate you showing 3 different systems with 3 completely different sets of gear. Again, I think the Estelons were powered by Vitus amps, and the Von Schweikert system that's on Sunday is going to be with VAC, and I know that's going to be a splendid experience. I wish I could have made it. But that is my review of the Acora system from this Super Speaker Showcase. Until then, I will see y'all next time. Cheers.